Now, from Atlanta News First, the issues that matter to you. This is On the Record.
U.S. Department of Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is set to testify before Congress on Thursday, and this is a highly anticipated testimony from the current Secretary of Health and Human Services under President Donald Trump's administration, and this testimony comes in the wake of a lot of chaos and confusion at the highest level of the Atlanta-based Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. I'm Tim Darnell. This is Wednesday, September 3rd. This is On the Record with Atlanta News First, our midweek report where we take a look at some of the happenings politically that are occurring across the nation and how they impact Atlanta and Georgia. As I said, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is set to testify on Thursday, September 4th, before the U.S. Senate Finance Committee, and we're certain to hear a lot of pointed questions and inquiries from senators to the Secretary of Health and Human Services regarding not only his highly publicized sentiments regarding various forms of vaccine and his skepticism as far as their effectiveness is concerned, but also the major shakeups that have happened at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. You'll recall last week Dr. Susan Monarez, who was the director of the CDC, who was only confirmed by the U.S. Senate less than a month ago, was fired by the White House for her refusal to, quote-unquote, fall in line with some of the Trump administration's guidelines and priorities along its Make America Healthy Again agenda. Now, first of all, we have a national report from one of our national correspondents on the current situation at the leadership of the Atlanta-based Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Jim O'Neill is the new acting director of the CDC, just a day after the White House fired Dr. Susan Monarez. Monarez had clashed with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. over vaccines. Her attorney said that she refused to, quote, rubber stamp unscientific, reckless directives. O'Neill, a biotech investor with no medical background, is a close Kennedy advisor. During his confirmation hearing in June, he said he's pro-vaccine and backs the CDC schedule. His appointment comes as several high-profile leaders resign, including Dr. Dimitri Daskalakis, a national public health voice and LGBTQ+ advocate.
The health of our children and the health of adults.
In his resignation letter, Dr. Dimitri, as he's known, wrote, "I am unable to serve in an environment that treats CDC as a tool to generate policies and materials that do not reflect scientific reality." He told Atlanta News First, CDC employees are also your neighbors.
People are what makes CDC great, and I feel like seeing them dehumanized by mis and disinformation, this is CDC. This is what people need to see.
We're losing a lot of really important institutional knowledge.
Former employee Sarah Boehm fears what's next, but hopes staff still inside will keep fighting for public health.
I know that there's a lot of dedicated people inside, very committed to the mission of making America a healthier place and saving American lives.
Now, that was a report from one of our national correspondents on who is the current acting, or perhaps interim, or perhaps soon to be permanent director of the CDC here in Atlanta. Yesterday, a group of Georgia State Democratic lawmakers held a roundtable on the current leadership turmoil at the CDC. Now, this was held at the state capitol in downtown Atlanta, and our own political reporter, Doug Reardon, was on hand to give you this report. Here is his report right now.
Thank you so much for being here.
At a Capitol roundtable and subsequent press conference, former CDC officials and lawmakers with connections to the Public Health Agency addressed pressing issues. For one, an erosion of trust between employees and Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. In an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal, Kennedy wrote Tuesday that, quote, bureaucratic inertia, politicized science, and mission creep have corroded the purpose of the CDC and squandered public trust.
I recognize you really can't get politics completely out of public health. It's really a priority here. What are you putting first? And we're asking that science go first.
Dr. Daniel Jernigan was a high-ranking CDC official until he resigned last week alongside several others. He expressed concern for the future of the CDC and its workers after the roundtable.
I feel that they can make it through, but I can't tell right now, given all the cuts to staffing, the cuts to resources, and the undercutting of science, whether or not we're going to be able to make it through this.
Dr. Deb Houry, who resigned alongside Jernigan, said she was especially concerned about the release of the U.S. vaccine schedule, overseen by noted vaccine skeptic and new CDC director, Jim O'Neill.
Any additional step it takes for a person to get a vaccine is one less step that they will get a vaccine.
But other vaccine skeptics who also came to the Capitol Tuesday were glad there was a new perspective at the CDC and hoped it would lead to more studies of adverse side effects to vaccines. It was the suspected motive of the gunman in last month's CDC shooting who claimed the COVID shot caused his violent act.
We don't know if the vaccines are causing, but we sure as hell need to find out if they do or definitively don't.
Now, that was a report from Doug Reardon on yesterday's roundtable held in downtown Atlanta at the state capitol, I believe, by Georgia state Democratic lawmakers who were very pointed in their questions and criticism of President Donald Trump and Secretary of Health and Human Services Robert F. Kennedy's shakeup at the top levels of the Atlanta-based Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Now, the Secretary's testimony tomorrow comes ahead of a return to work order that senior CDC management has issued to all of its workers and colleagues to return to work no later than September 15th, next Friday, I believe, a week from this Friday. This comes after the shooting of a couple of weeks ago, about 4 to 5 weeks ago now, where a lone gunman, identified as Patrick Joseph White, a 30-year-old male from Kennesaw, opened fire on nearby the campus of the CDC in DeKalb County. That shooting not only caused massive damage to the building and on the campus, but also claimed the life, tragically, of a DeKalb County police officer, David Rose. So at the same time, there's a lot of shakeup and turmoil at the highest levels of the Atlanta-based Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. CDC workers have been notified that they are expected to return to work full-time no later than next Friday, September 15th. Now, this coming Sunday on the Record on Atlanta News First, which broadcasts every Sunday at 11 a.m., will not only be talking about the Secretary's testimony before the Senate Finance Committee, the ongoing confusion and chaos at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, the possible politicization of the nation's public health infrastructure, but we'll also be looking at taking a very solemn and somber look back on the events of 1 year ago when a lone gunman on September 4th, 2004, entered the hallways of Appalachia High School and opened fire with an automatic rifle type of weapon. A shooting that claimed the lives of 4 people, injured 9 others, and devastated an entire community. Atlanta News First will be covering the 1-year commemoration of that tragic shooting of a year ago through extensive coverage, not only on Atlanta News First, but also we'll be looking back at what changes in gun laws, gun safety that Georgia legislators have or have not made in the wake of last year's deadly, tragic shooting at Appalachia High School. Other topics we'll be looking at is a possible major update to Georgia's Senate and gubernatorial races, one or the other, as well as looking back on all of this week's political news in the nation's most dynamic political state. I'm Tim Darnell, reminding you to watch On the Record with Atlanta News First every Sunday at 11 a.m. on Atlanta News First, WANF TV. You can also watch and listen to every episode of On the Record with Atlanta News First on our YouTube channel, on your streaming device, and also a reminder to listen to the On the Record podcast on your favorite podcasting platform.
Thank you for watching Political Update from Atlanta News First Plus. For more breaking news, live coverage, and political updates, download the Atlanta News First app. You can also watch on YouTube, Roku, Apple TV, and Fire TV. Listen to more of our Political Update podcasts by searching Atlanta News First on your preferred listening platform.